Thank you so much for having me, everybody. My name is Matt Johnson. I'm from Church World Service. I have a weird and long title. I'm the Strategic Community Partnerships Officer. I don't know why they tagged officer on. It's an HR thing, but around the office, sometimes people will call me Officer Johnson. Please don't do that. I always joke. I have a really good friend in E-Town who it always seems very far to get to E-Town from the city, and so I always joke that like whenever she wants to hang out, that she has to come to me. And she got very upset that I got up early this morning to come up to E-Town. So that's how prized you should feel that I was with you. Oh, you'll get up, and it's like, yep, I will get up for the Church of the Brother and E-Town always. So I just wanted to give a quick update about where we are at CWS, what's going on in the world. I'm sure you see daily bombardment of news, as do we. Sometimes we know the news before it's public, and other times we learn of really important changes the same way that you all do, which is the New York Times alert on your phone, or some sort of alert in the paper. So I don't claim that we have complete secret knowledge about a lot of things, because we're surprised by it as well. But I'll give you a sort of state of play, so to speak, of where we're at. I want to start kind of where CWS is, and then just talk about some of the challenges and opportunities that we're dealing with at the moment. And I want to make sure that you have plenty of time for questions. So if you have an emerging, I hate it when you're in a thing and you have a really good question, and then by the end it either feels like the topic has moved on or you're going back. So if you have a question that is emergent in the time, I don't mind if you just raise your hand, and then we can have a definite question and answer period at the end. But please feel free to interrupt me if I'm using terminology you don't know, or if there's something that I'm assuming that is common knowledge when it's not. Sometimes, again, when you're in it every day, you forget what is public and what isn't. So let's start with the state of CWS. I'm sure that many of you have seen the concerning news about federal funding cuts, I think a direct assault on resettlement programs. We're going to talk about why I think that, and also why I think that assault is targeted and particularly petty and cruel. We'll talk about, like, there's some parts of it that are, I guess you could say in line with the administration's goals, and then other things are just to pour salt in wounds, which we'll talk about in a second. But to talk about where we are, if you had asked that question, how are we doing about 2 months ago, actually around 2 months ago, I would have a very different answer. I'm sure you saw that we had to furlough about 70% of our workforce. We were not being paid by the government for work that had already been done. And that's something that I really try to emphasize, because we can have political debates about how much refugee resettlement should be funded and that kind of thing. But what we can't debate about is paying your bills. This is something that is a very basic function of government, that you have to pay bills that you've incurred. So most of the backlog for us, it wasn't necessarily a funding cut, it was a cash flow issue, because the administration didn't authorize payments for about $40 million worth of work that CWS Global had done in the last quarter of 2024 and in the first quarter of 2025. Now, as some of you know, because you've been part of it, we were resettling people literally right up until Inauguration Day, because we anticipated that the new administration would stop refugee resettlement on day one. Despite the claims over and over and over again that the goal is to crack down on illegal immigration and folks that came here the wrong way, the first day, the very first executive order about immigration was to stop flights from refugees. That was the first order of business. So that tells you where the priorities are about immigration. And we're going to talk about some, I'll just say, some sort of maybe hypocritical actions on immigration. So what happened then on the 20th? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you define like refugees and immigrants and all?
Sure.
The difference between?
Yeah, no problem. So anybody that comes into the country, it's a very good point. I have a hero who wrote a book about her experience working with refugees. And she included a whole chapter on the terminology, and her editor said, "Don't do that, it's boring, no one wants to hear about that." And she said, "You have to know about it because that's destiny. You have that word by your name, you have a totally different legal pathway than if you have a different word." So we use the term, obviously, refugee to mean anybody that is displaced by natural disaster or social collapse or whatever. The U.S. government considers it an immigration status that allows you passage to the country after deep vetting by the U.S., including the CIA and FBI, after a well-documented displacement from your country based on any number of categories, right? So you have to demonstrate without a doubt that if you would return to your country, you would face persecution or death based on your religion, your ethnicity, your political opinion, your gender, whatever it is. And then after that process, you are eligible to go to a third country. And when you enter the US as a refugee, you have already been vetted more than any person entering the country. You have basically been set up on a pathway towards citizenship. You are work authorized the second that you land in the country. And basically, when the US resettles a refugee, their intention is that you will be staying for the rest of your life, and that's the goal. You are on the path to a green card right off the bat. There are obviously other categories of immigrant. There's asylum seekers. An asylum seeker is just a refugee that happens to be able to get to the US without being resettled. So an asylum seeker would be somebody that goes to a border and says, "I have a well-founded fear that I can't go back to my country, so I'm here to seek safety." In that case, then, you have to do all those things that a refugee would do, but you have to do it while you're in the country. About 8% at the top level, about 8 to 9% of the folks that plead asylum will actually receive asylum in the US. So it's a very slim system. Right now, we're looking at rates about 2% that are being approved for asylum. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Then, of course, there are other categories. There are folks that were undocumented, came into the country in an unauthorized way. There are folks that maybe have done that and been given some status. The other concerning group that we'll talk about today are folks that have received what's called parole or temporary status. Parole is a PR nightmare to try to explain to people because the only time you think of parole is in prison. But for example, Ukrainians and Afghans were given humanitarian parole. And that is a system that brings folks quickly when there's just an issue that you can't wait on. So the fall of Kabul or the invasion of Ukraine were such an issue that we said, yes, you can come into the country through parole and eventually establish that you should be here long term. Other folks that have received something like parole are, we call it the CHNV, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans who have systems in their countries that are collapsing so badly right now or face such hardship that they're given a temporary status in the country to be here legally. So that was like folks in Springfield, Ohio, remember during the election, they're eating the cats and dogs thing. Those folks all had were in the country legally and had received parole, right? So our immigration system makes no sense. I have a PhD in philosophy. I'm about to take the LSAT, the lawyer thing. So I thought, oh yeah, I'll just take this course in immigration law. It'll be fine. You learn the basic principles and then you can apply them. No, like our system is like a sprawling suburb. You know, just things pop up when they do, yet they make no sense. You know, so we'll get into that then. But nevertheless, the refugee program, which is the sort of heart of CWS's work locally, suspended on day one. 4 days later, we received, quite frankly, surprising news. I just told you that we resettled folks right up until the 19th. We resettled 180 people from December 1st to January 19th, knowing that this was likely to have, because last time he was elected, he did that day one as well, stopped refugee flights indefinitely. But what we were surprised to learn was 5 days later, we received a stop work order from the Department of State. And if you're unfamiliar with that, a stop work order basically just says you have to stop working on whatever contracted agreement that you have with the government immediately. And that was to provide services for those 180 people that had arrived just prior to the inauguration. Meaning we had to leave them without money, without rent, food, all of that stuff. Basically, it forced us not to. So at first, we had our lawyers take a look at it and they said, oh, this means they're not going to pay for those services. So we can do the services, we'll just have to depend on donations and get that. Then we got clarity from the government lawyer that said, you are not allowed to provide those services for folks. You're not allowed to help them with their rent. You're not allowed to take them grocery shopping. It was a shocking development to basically go from, we won't pay for this, to you are breaking the law or the contract if you help people. So we immediately went to all of our elected officials because we were worried that those folks could be homeless in a month, that they could be without services, that they were, by the way, contracted with the federal government, right? Like the government makes a deal with refugees. We will resettle you. You have to do these things on a timeline and we will provide these services. So they were letting go of those services for those folks. Even F&M, Franklin and Marshall College, had a grant that I helped them find to see if they could be resettling refugees on campus. They got the same stop work order. It was a research project and they got a stop work order saying you can't spend any more of the money that we gave you on this matter. So as you can imagine, CWS was in a bit of a tailspin. I was one of the employees, one of the 70% that were furloughed. It was basically so sudden that we received that stop work order on the 24th of January. And by February 3rd, 70% of the workforce in Lancaster was at home and basically without a job. And that was, so, yeah, go ahead.
Just to make that personal for us.
Yeah.
That was the point at which the family we resettled was told, you submitted all your stuff for legal work, but we're sorry, here it is all back. You'll have to find somebody else. We're not allowed to.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So for the next month and a half, we were waiting on pins and needles to find out if we would get funding back, if this would be something that our representatives would fight for. As I mentioned, we had met with Congressman Smucker at the last day in January. We met with Senator Fetterman on the February 10th. We met with Senator McCormick on February 15th. And while they were all in their offices, very like, this is a problem, we had talked about, for instance, several of our clients had their families' flights canceled. There were 14 flights that were supposed to come to the United States in February, all canceled. And for those of you that have done resettlement for a long time, you know how long that process is. Anybody want to guess how long a typical refugee family is in a camp or in a third country before they're resettled? On average, 19 years.
Oh my God.
And only about 0.5% of all refugees in the world are ever resettled to a third country. So imagine telling somebody, you have this pathway now. You are going to get safety. You are going to get to this place. You have to go through medical checks, background checks. You have to go, if somebody scrutinizes your story, they come to you and they say, I don't believe you. You have to prove that this happened to you. You have to relive that trauma over and over and over and over again for a government official to get here. A lot of the people waiting, and it's a sort of, what's the word I'm looking, it's almost like a jigsaw, not a jigsaw puzzle. It's almost like you get one, you have your health certificate, that lasts 2 years. Then you have your, permission to fly, that lasts a year. So if you miss, it's this kind of cascading thing. If you miss one of those, you have to start back again.
Walk them all in reverse.
That's it. I like that. Wow, I'm going to use, can I use that? I'll credit you, I promise. So I think, for example, there was a Syrian family that I got close to when I first started working for CWS. They arrived in 2016. Their daughter was pregnant. And right before they got on the plane, the doctor said, she can't fly right now. And they said, okay, well, we'll stay here. And we don't want to go without her. And they said, if you do that, things could get messed up. Don't worry, she'll be right behind you. So they fly to the US in 2016. And 8 years later, the daughter and her family joined. So the patriarch of that family had an 8-year-old grandson that he had never met. because that it took so long. And they said basically she had her baby and they said, oh no, your medical check is now expired. Okay, so got the medical check. Ooh, your background check is now expired. So we have to start that all over. It's not an easy system where we can just scoop people up and bring them over. It's and you know, this is part of the deal that we make with the government. They're well vetted. They've done through all of these thorough investigations. So not only were we not allowed to work with those folks, we were down to essentially a skeleton crew. Now, luckily, I know my coworkers really well. I was part of the mutual aid network. We raised about $70,000 for the furloughed folks so that they could pay the rent and get things going. And we were doing a lot of advocacy behind the scenes. Meanwhile, at work, everyone was doing 3 to 4 jobs. You know, if you were a resettlement caseworker, you were now the chief operating officer, and you were also a paralegal. So whoever was doing, you know, was doing several jobs. On the 11th of February, we sued the federal government along with some other refugee resettlement agencies in an ongoing court case called Pacito v. Trump. Pacito is a Congolese refugee who was literally on the tarmac when the report came in and basically said, this has caused me undue harm. You told me I was going, you made this deal with me, and now I couldn't come. So they were able to sue the federal government along with the resettlement agency. I think that right now our federal judiciary is essentially strained farther than it has ever been before. And I think the administration knows that things take a long time. When you litigate them in court, they take forever, right? So even though very quickly the judge in that case said 3 things. You have to pay them for the work that they've already done. And I'm going to make a statement that I think is not controversial. You can tell me if you think it is. I think our judges need to have tech advisors that explain to them modern systems, because the judge said, State Department and DHS, you have to make 300 payments a day to these resettlement agencies to make them whole again. Sounds like a lot until you realize the DHS and Department of State do about 15,000 payments a day. So that meant the money started trickling in, but they decided to break down invoices and say, $50, sure, we'll pay that one today, we'll pay the $75 one, we'll pay when before they would just give you a lump sum payment for all of it. So they kind of flow rolled the payment back. The second thing that the judge said was, while the president does have the authority to make broad decisions about immigration, that the promise that had been made to the folks that were arriving was binding and that those folks had to be resettled. That was ruled on February 17th. So that's what, 3 months ago, practically? And ever since then, it's just been a squabbling back and forth about a compliance timeline, how long do you have to take? What do you mean? What refugees do we have to resettle? I mean, basically kind of just gumming up the works and making the court case take forever. And then the third thing that the judge has essentially said is that the president does not have the power to unilaterally end the program. The program was created by Congress. He has some discretion, but he can't just sort of decide wholesale who does get to come in and who doesn't. So that has led to, I mean, some optimism, but as you can kind of maybe tell, there's a frustration with how slowly the process takes. They essentially, and I think that it's not conspiratorial, it's not, you know, I'm not you know, this isn't a tinfoil hat situation. They are trying to dismantle the refugee resettlement program in America. They're trying to get rid of it, and they're trying to kind of bleed the resettlement agencies to the point where they can't exist anymore. We'll talk about a particularly gross version of that in a second. But there's cause for hope, at least in terms of where CWS is at the moment. Out of the furloughed, May 9th, which was this past week, Friday, was the last day for layoffs at CWS. Many of the people that were furloughed were laid off. Many were laid off. Some found other work while they were furloughed, and some of us were brought back. And I would say we're probably operating at about 35% of what we were even 2 months, 3 months ago. So it is definitely a very different office. The places where we still have a lot of workers, our legal service department is busier than they've ever been, and that makes sense because a lot of people's status has been questioned. A lot of people are defending themselves in court. Our employment division is going because there are state grants that help support that, federal pass-through grants. Resettlement is right now practically non-existent. We're closing off cases and then, basically we don't expect there to be any refugees coming. Yeah.
Matt,
Yeah.
with the funds being cut.
Yeah.
And then the community
Yeah.
stepping forth.
Yeah.
And like, has that gap been closed?
No, the gap hasn't been closed, but the community, like fundraising is the only way that we've been able to do what we've done. And I was just gonna say that has been the most amazing thing has been the outpouring of generosity from this community, and the wider community as well in terms of charitable giving has helped immensely. We've gotten some of those funds back, as I said, they're kind of a trickle instead of a lump sum. But that's been what's going on. There's a group in Lancaster that is, it's actually Lancaster COB, members of Lancaster COB and Brethren in Christ and a couple of other churches that want to create a position that is going to be like a liaison between CWS and the community, which is really exciting because what I appreciate about folks like you who have been in the trenches, so to speak, with us is knowing that even offloading volunteer opportunities for someone is a lot of work. Getting somebody ready to be served and getting the servers ready to help is a lot of work. It's meaningful work and it's important, but it can still take up time. So they've created this position that they're going to fund to kind of be a liaison, not just for CWS, but any refugees or immigrants that need help. So I'm happy to say that we're relatively stable at the moment, though we think it's going to be a different story at the end of the fiscal year, which for us is September 30th. That's usually when the president makes a determination about how many refugees will be coming in. We're looking at the budget proceedings right now, and I'm sad to say that right now, at least, every item related to refugee resettlement has been zeroed out. So they've asked for $0 for refugee resettlement in the budget, and we're pretty sure the president is going to either zero out the refugee program or provide the sort of poison pill that I've been kind of leading up to. So all that said, CWS is doing everything it can to protect the folks that are here through our legal services, protect the folks that are job seekers, that are just getting on their feet until that program closes. And then we're just trying our best to do advocacy with our representatives. Though, as I said, that has not been super encouraging so far. That the argument back has been kind of just, well, the president gets to make these decisions, and my response is always, of course, just because it's someone's right to do something doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do, right? So, and I found many examples of our elected leaders criticizing the decisions of other presidents that were just exercising their rights. So clearly they know this distinction, just kind of hiding behind it. Interestingly enough, however, the most exciting movement that I've seen is not at the federal level, but at the state level. I think people are recognizing that immigration is crucial to Pennsylvania's existence. And I'll give you some stats that perhaps you're not thinking about in terms of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is the second oldest state in the country. The average age is 40, which doesn't sound like much now that I'm 40, but it feels, it is on the upper end. We have the second highest brain drain in the country. And if you're not familiar with that, it's either when somebody goes to school here, a native goes to school here, they move, or people move to go to college and never come back. We have the second highest occurrence of that. 77% of our counties are losing population, some precipitously. Johnstown has lost 30% of its population in the last 15 years. Think about that. It's a demographic spiral. And it means that these places are threatened. It just so happens that also in these places are where politicians get the most play out of blaming immigrants for this problem, when it's actually the immigrants that are keeping us afloat, right? We would have lost about 180,000 in population had it not been foreign-born migration coming to Pennsylvania. Lancaster County, 1/3 of all of our growth is foreign-born migration. Think about that for a second. 1/3 of our growth is foreign-born migration. The only other thing keeping us competitive demographically is the high birth rate among Amish people. That's the only other thing. So think about that for a second. When I talk to state legislators, this is what I tell them. You are overseeing a demographic exodus, unlike anything that we've ever seen. And you think, okay, well, maybe some towns fall apart, maybe some businesses leave, but this also means we lose representation in Congress, right? If we lose population, we lose representatives. It means that we lose out on federal funding. It means that, you know, we have 25% of the state really doing well, while 75% falls behind. And if you look where the places are that are growing, it might surprise you. It's southeast, south central and southeast, Pittsburgh, Scranton, and Erie. That's pretty much the areas that are growing. Everywhere else is falling behind. In fact, we said, I work with a really lovely doctor who helps medical professionals from other countries get back to a certain level of certification. Don't get me started about PA and how hard it is for them to get their medical licenses back. But we sent a resident to Johnstown, and she, a Cuban doctor, she was welcomed like a returning hero. Like when she got there, they were like, "You want to come here?" And I mean, she didn't say, not really, but there was a residency program open, and you know, but she was the first person not from that area to come there as a resident in something like 15 years. And they had to kind of swallow the idea that she was a perfectly proficient Cuban doctor who had basically gone through medical school twice because we didn't have a way to accept. So when I talk to state legislators, I say our system is actively bringing Pennsylvania, is actively hurting Pennsylvania. States around us have figured out ways to onboard people's existing abilities. We have civil engineers coming, doctors, and again, not that that's why we do this work. Like it just said, like, you know, somebody said the other day, "Wow, you're really good at talking about the economic benefits of refugees." Like that's not why I got into this work. It just it's a happy circumstance that, you know, we would do this work if people weren't doctors, or and you don't have to be a doctor to deserve that respect. But when there are people who have amazing backgrounds, and we're basically just saying, sorry, you can't get back to it. Even simple things. There was a Syrian woman who was a really top-notch salon owner in Damascus before the government kind of pushed everybody out and the Civil War started. She was cutting hair in her house in Lancaster, and basically the city found out, and they said, you have to have a cosmetology license. She said, "Wow, I've done this for 15 years at home. Let me show you." "No, you have to take the state test." "Oh, but the state test in English, it'll cost you $1,500 to have it translated into Arabic. And then you'll have to go through, by the way," and this is, I'm not making any kind of commentary, I'm just making a comparison. "You have to go through all of these classes. You have to take an introductory chemistry class." You know, it turns out that it actually takes more demonstrated educational hours to become a cosmetologist in Pennsylvania than a police officer. So she just said, "Forget it. I can't pay $1,500 to pay that test and go through all of this. I'll just go get a job somewhere else." And now, you know, here was a place for her to be able to show what she was up to. In Charleroi, Pennsylvania, anybody heard of Charleroi? I had not. Yeah, that's not true. I've been there once accidentally. By which I mean I was in my friend's house who lived across the bridge, and I crossed the bridge. When the Springfield Haitians became everybody's, you know, sort of scapegoat du jour, Charleroi is a small Rust Belt city in Western PA that had basically lost 60% of its population over the last 50 years. And a lot of Haitian immigrants went there to find work. And it turns out that they basically transformed the town. They brought businesses back to Main Street. I just spoke with the head of the factory there. It's called 4th Street Barbecue, the frozen food company. 850 out of their 1,100 workers are immigrants, most of whom are Haitian parolees. And I want you to think about that. This is how America has worked since time immemorial, right? You know, we start to lose energy, immigrants come in and take those jobs and refine industries and so forth. So the senator there, who is politically conservative, was not putting up with people criticizing the Haitians, and she's on board. She's ready to fight to make sure that we have good policies in Pennsylvania, but also good immigration policies, because she understands that her town is basically dying. They've lost they had a Pyrex factory there. Pyrex left. They had a pasta making factory there. It left. This is the last business of its size in a 15-mile radius, right? So they understand the stakes. And even if it's good politics to criticize immigrants, she realizes that it's not a good idea for the actual. So I did want to give you some optimism before I talk about a little bit more about federal policy. So just to recap, TWS hit really hard. We're down about 35% of the workforce we had 3 months ago, but we're still fighting, and we're going to be. I just want to reassure you, we will be in this community in 5 years. We'll be here in 10 years. We're not going. This is something that we are devoted to. And it's something that we're hearing from Global, but also in some form or fashion, we're going to be here. It's just what that looks like in the meantime. Secondly, we've had not much luck at the federal level, but a lot of luck, not a lot of luck, a lot of energy at the state level to hopefully get some things done that help refugees and immigrants feel welcome in the state and help them get a leg up. I'm about to talk about some of the more concerning aspects of it, and I want to just sort of warn you that there's just no way of sort of sugarcoating what's going on. But the thing that's kind of on all of our minds as of this week, we knew that this was something that was coming. We didn't know when, wasn't something that we could talk about broadly. But I will say, this is going to sound like a positive thing until you realize what it is, that the president has allowed refugees come in, but they are the white South African farmers.
That's what I was gonna ask about.
Yeah. And basically, this is a gut punch to all of us. The way I've been describing it is like, imagine somebody living in a homeless shelter because they're having their kitchen redone, taking up space in a homeless shelter when they have every ability to live a fruitful and valuable life where they are. There has been a movement, I don't know how, but I think there's an Elon Musk connection here to South Africa. He was able to persuade the administration that just like Syrian refugees or just like Congolese refugees, white South African farmers in South Africa are a persecuted minority and therefore deserve refugee status. Now, I think if I had to reconstruct it, this was a offhand comment that got seized upon, and the folks that are truly anti-immigrant in the White House saw this as an opportunity to force a bitter pill on a poison pill on refugee resettlement agencies, and I think truly make a cruel mockery of the program. I said earlier that refugees spend 19 years on average in a refugee camp or a third country. 0.5% of all refugees ever get resettled to a third country. And if you think about the fact that just in UNHCR recognized refugees, there's 63 million people in the world that fall under the actual heading of refugee that have documented through their own trauma and pain their refugee status. Those folks are now being put to the side for Afrikaners who don't face the problems that we're talking about. And I want you to think about some of the folks that have been abandoned by, and again, I don't think you should have to prove your value to be to be a refugee. But for example, I work with someone who was in the Afghan army working for the US. She was evacuated, but her family is still very vulnerable. They're in Pakistan and they were slated to come. We're not allowing the families of Afghan heroes that worked alongside the mission and put a big target on their back because they did so. They're not allowed to come. Congolese families that are being reunited with people they haven't seen in 15, 20 years were put aside for folks that, again, don't fit the proper categories. My direct report, who's our community organizer, his sister was supposed to arrive in February. She got pushed aside. Folks that are facing gang violence right now, folks that are in serious trouble are having their place in line cut by folks that have been processed in 3 months, have actively lobbied to be resettled, and who aren't able to meet even the basic requirements of UNHCR refugee status, that are going to be coming as early as tomorrow. Now, not only are they bringing folks that don't qualify as refugees, and by the way, there's no racial category that refugees belong to. In fact, I have to remind people sometimes that refugee is something that happens to you. It's not who you are, right? So for example, very early on in this job, in the first Trump administration, there was a law that was shown to be unconstitutional, but we had to follow it for a little bit, that we had to go to and some of you were there for this, we had to go to every municipality that resettled refugees and have them vote again to agree to do it. Blatantly unconstitutional. That basically you're not allowed to, like, that would basically be saying that if you're resettled here, you're not allowed to cross municipal borders, right? You know, what we were gonna do if it hadn't been ruled blatantly unconstitutional. And I got to be at that federal courthouse. It was the best feeling in the entire world. That judge just read them the riot act. He was like, this is the most unconstitutional thing I've seen in my entire time. It was wonderful. But anyway, we still had to do all of this. We went to E-Town, Millersville, Lancaster, York, all of those places. I'm happy to say I think we got unanimous votes in every place. E-Town, many of your folks came. I remember Pastor Lozakovitz, Davidson Lozakovitz was there with some folks, and it was great. In Ephrata, they said, we're fine, we love this idea. You know, they saw themselves as strict constitutionalists. We can't tell someone they can't move into our area or they can't move across the border. Yeah. So then they said, we just have one question. We'd worked with them for a month. We have one question. Why are you coming to Ephrata? And I said, because after Lancaster, you resettle more refugees than anywhere else in Lancaster County. No, we don't. What are you talking about? And I said, you know all the Russians and Ukrainians and Belarusians and all those folks? They're refugees. What? Yeah. How did you think that you have 3 Russian delis on Main Street in Ephrata and you don't have immigrants coming? What did you? Well, they're not refugees. They just came here. Right. So this was their understanding that they didn't have refugees because of their skin color. Right. You know, and when Ukrainians came, this isn't, you know, so even though, you know, I mentioned the white Afrikaners, it's not that they're white is the problem. It's the fact that they are the privileged minority in their society. And the Trump administration has planned a welcome party for them at Dulles Airport tomorrow when they arrive. And that's why I say it's more than just, you know, it's more than just helping out a persecuted minority. It's trying to essentially say to the people, you're not welcome if you're from these areas, but you are, and we're going to throw you a party. No refugee family has ever received a government-sponsored welcome party to come here. And they had also basically said that if this goes well, that there'll be more coming. Meanwhile, like I said, families of Afghan heroes are stuck in Pakistan. People are not sure what's going to happen to them after this.
Will Church World Service be asked to resettle them, or who's going to resettle them?
Right. So they asked all of the resettlement agencies to resettle folks. And most of them, especially, I mean, our office was asked, and we said that we didn't feel comfortable doing that we wouldn't be able to face our colleagues who were waiting for family members who, quote, did it the right way, right? Like this is the phrase that you hear all the time. You have to do things the right way. And now we're, fast tracking people that didn't do it in any way. Really, they were just hand selected. There was an ask put out that once folks arrive, if we don't provide services for them, that we will lose all of the remaining funding that we have. So we haven't made a final decision on that. It's not going to happen in Lancaster because our local organization said we don't feel comfortable. But I wouldn't be surprised if a CWS affiliate said yes because they think that it's part of their survival plan. I personally think that that's why they're doing this as a poison pill. My personal feeling, if I can share it with you, is we learned from 2 Ivy League schools how to work with this administration. Columbia, I think, folded very quickly, and they found that as soon as they did, there were a new set of requirements, and then a new set of requirements, and a new set of requirements. They've already kind of set that off, whereas I think Harvard has said no, and I would prefer if we just said, go ahead, take away the rest of it, and then we can fight it in court personally. That's my feeling, but of course, I'm not in charge of our legal strategy as a global organization. The other thing that I want to bring up to you that you may have affected many of you personally, because I know that this church has really walked alongside us for a very long time, is what's happening with deportations, specifically in the Bhutanese Nepali community. Central Pennsylvania is the second highest, has the second largest Bhutanese Nepali population in the country after Columbus, Ohio, which is a metro area that's about 7 times larger than Central PA as a metro area. So folks are overrepresented. You may have seen that about 60 Bhutanese Nepali men have been deported now. Former refugees have been deported from the country. Now, I will say that several of them did have removal orders for things like DUIs and these types of things. They did have removal orders, but until this point, the government rightly said, we can't send them anywhere because if you're familiar with the crisis that created the Bhutanese Nepali refugees, they were in Bhutan. The king of Bhutan decided to basically get rid of anybody that wasn't ethnically Bhutanese. So ethnically cleansed, politically created political prisoners and forced everybody out to Nepal. Nepal didn't accept the refugees as citizens because they had lived in Bhutan, so they were stateless. Then they came here to the US as refugees, most of them. And then now, when they're deported, there's no place to deport them to. So people have lost family members that they thought might be sent to El Salvador in one of the super high max penitentiaries there. And I want you to realize that what did happen, as disgusting as it is actually perhaps the safest one, but it's still not an option. Basically, our government, Bhutan does not have diplomatic relationships with basically any other countries. So that was all unofficial channels to deport these men. Like I said, 60 of whom live between here and Harrisburg, essentially. They were flown to India, then flown, and by the way, the price of this is insane. For any time you talk about cost cutting, a nonstop flight to Delhi, then a flight into Bhutan. The Bhutanese government provided 30,000 rupees, drove them to the border, bribed the guards at the border, and set them back in Nepal, where they have no status, they have basically no existence there. The men that were sent back there, most of them were arrested immediately for crossing the border illegally, and they're now in a Nepali jail. One man that I've been talking to managed to find his long lost cousin and is basically bunkered down in that house. Some have gone back to India because there's no life for them there. So think about that. They were made stateless 45 years ago, had status here, and then they were deported to a place that didn't want them, that paid off border guards to get them across. And this is happening with a lot of different populations. I'm sure you may have read this week that the United States is in talks to send people to Libyan prisons. Libya. We're sending people to Libyan prisons that are some of have the worst humanitarian and human rights marks in the world. for migrants. We're considering sending people who have never been to Libya to a Libyan prison, rather than, find an arrangement that actually works. So the deportation and the increase in what we consider to be sort of illegal removal and that legal challenge is the part of our organization, the legal services part, where we're seeing almost on a daily basis these types of shortcuts and legal workarounds that are that have been shown to be blatantly illegal. I'm sure you're familiar with the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was he had a judge that said that he's not allowed to be deported because he faced a well-established concern about being tortured if he went back, who was now sent to a supermax prison in El Salvador and has been routinely from every level of judge said that he has to be returned, and he's not being. So we're entering a really fraught, we are deep in to a very fraught moment in immigration in our country. There is no distinction between doing it legally and doing it illegally anymore. Going after immigrants, no matter what their status is. We've seen student visas revoked without the student's knowledge. We are actively, I teach at F&M once a year, and all of my international students are staying over the summer and having to figure that out because they're afraid that if they leave the country, they won't get back in. They are actively censoring what they write and say. Another former refugee client of ours who became one of my favorite students ever got to go to Greece for an honors program at college. And they were told to basically delete every social media app from their phones because the Border Patrol would look in their phones. And they said, well, we're American citizens. Doesn't matter. They're going to look at your phones and see if there was anything critical of the president or critical of the actions in Israel. They were told that they would look at their phones for those things. So I don't want to just alarm you. I hope that there was enough hope in there to sustain you, but also I want to be honest about the situation that we're in, and that why it needs people to push back. And the other thing that I think that folks really need to know, and I'd be happy to come back and do one of these, is knowing your rights in this time. Whenever I bring up know your rights trainings around immigration, people always say, well, I'm not an immigrant. Why do I need to know that? Well, there's a lot of reasons. One, because in most cases, when they pick people up, whether it's legal or illegal, they do it in places that are public because it's a lot easier to try to get somebody in public than it is to get an actual warrant. So you may know that in years past, places like churches, places like hospitals, places like job sites, courtrooms were considered sensitive places that ICE wouldn't go because that was just too much. Yeah.
Saturday, we were in Maryland and we talked with a teacher who lives in Washington, D.C., lives in D.C., and it's a horrible place. There's so much fear. Her friends of years standing have lost their jobs, and the public schools, many public schools, will not send the kids out for recess.
Yeah.
Because of nannies and because of being picked up by ICE.
Absolutely.
Kids.
Yep.
So
yep.
It's here.
I've heard that from lots of folks. And I forgot to mention schools are on that list. It used to be that those places were off limits for ICE in only the most serious cases. But as you've probably seen, the folks that they've gone after, despite the promises to rid us of the criminals and the people that do bad things, the folks that are being picked up are like juvenile cancer patients on their way to treatment. They're waiting around hospitals to pick people up so that they can go. We saw a 4-year-old with brain cancer who was an American citizen that was deported with her mother, even though there was no due process. We are hearing hints of suspending habeas corpus, which has happened basically only twice in our nation's history during the Civil War, to be able to get rid of whatever due process that we have. And you're exactly right. I mean, I talk, and the reason that I talk, the business I told you about, the barbecue place in Charleroi, I keep talking to them and saying, I'll come out to Charleroi and I'll do a know your rights. Well, no, our employees all have the cards. It's okay. They have the little cards. And I'm saying, I'm doing this because you as a business could find ICE raiding your business and just picking up anybody that they want. If you're not careful, you have to have a policy for it. You have to know what to do if they do that. And while they haven't made any actions on churches yet, there have been memos that we've seen that basically say they're gonna ignore that. Yeah.
One of the things I'd like to hear you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about, which was really special because our family, which was told no by
Yeah.
Church World Service, later was told it's
Yes.
okay now
Yes.
because of getting a lot of volunteers. And can you
Yeah.
talk about the volunteers and
Yes.
and how that's working for Church World
Yes,
Service?
so again, I mean, the impact that has happened, the impact on our work was mostly legal in terms of us not knowing what we're allowed to do and what we weren't allowed to do. It was probably even like against the letter of the stop work order to be organizing volunteers to do the work on our behalf, because that's still managing the case even by proxy, okay? But the groundswell of support that we have felt from volunteers that are willing to, I always say that working with refugees, immigrants is extremely vulnerable work, right? I had a friend of mine, colleague of mine, PhD, who worked with a family, took them to enroll in school, and she called me like 5 times once they got to the parking lot, because she was like, well, where's the entrance to the building? I don't know, I've never been to that school. Well, there's a sign here that says it's like a wrap. And basically, she was kind of feeling this vulnerability of, I have these folks that are in my care that I need to show that I know what I'm doing. We got to the school and I lost it because I didn't, or I've never used the bus system before. And it turns out the bus system isn't great. And if you get the bus here, then essentially you have to get a bus 2 hours before your shift to make sure, so there's a lot of vulnerability there. And I think what makes Lancaster County special and what makes CWS work has always been the volunteer work. And that has been able to extend our grasp. With this position that I was telling you that's coming on, I think that's going to be able to supercharge that work. My team is the team that manages volunteers. There were 11 of us. There's 2 of us now. And so everybody that worked with welcome teams, everybody that worked with volunteer coordination, faith outreach, all of that are gone.
We work with Chris.
Yeah. And I will tell you, okay, she'll kill me if she knows that I said this, but I don't know why I keep looking over here like that.
Get over in there.
That Krista is like is our archetype. She's our model for the position that we're creating. And it's my hope and that she actually is the position. She takes over the position because she has all that institutional knowledge. So I think that once we have that position online, we're able to feed the existing needs into that and connect with all the people that we already will, that we'll be able to create a volunteer network that is able to not replace, but certainly extend the reach of that. Yeah.
Are you aware of any churches that have developed policies or had training on what to do if during a Sunday morning service, ICE shows up and starts looking through the congregation, trying to pick up people?
I know many churches that have developed these policies, and that would be part of any training that I would do if you wanted to do that. Like right now, for example, just looking at the layout when I was walking in today, this room would be off limits to ICE, but the sanctuary, not so much. The parking lot, not so much. The public areas, the hallways and corridors, if they wanted to take an action. So there are ways that churches can
Do
be
some
prepared
preparation
for that. And it's funny because whenever I bring that up with certain congregations, they're like, "Oh, this sounds oppositional. I don't know if I want to do this." But this is essentially like it's a know your rights training. So this is what your constitutional rights are in this case. And ICE is very have have a well-earned reputation for trying to confuse you about what your rights are in those situations. There's a video that I show in the Know Your Rights training where a young man was driving someone that ICE wanted, and they pulled him over for no reason, which illegal thing, number one. And two, they kept flashing this paperwork at his face and said, if you don't listen to this, you, the driver, who's a citizen, you're gonna go to jail for 20 years. This is a federal, whatever. And he says, no, that's an administrative warrant. It's not a judicial warrant. It doesn't have force. You can't do it. And they said, oh, okay, you're about to go to jail forever, man. I hope you're right, all that kind of stuff. And he stood his ground and they drove away. And, again, some people see it and they're like, wow, I'm not used to being, oppositional. But again, this is about your rights, not just as individuals, but to have a sanctuary and a church that is outside of government control. We hear a lot about religious freedom, these days. And I think that should be a pretty basic one, that a church can have a service without federal agents breaking in.
It was front page news in LNP last week that ICE is being invited to a local Northwest Regional Police, I believe.
I was gonna get into that.
This is
Yeah.
our area.
Yeah, it is.
They patrol around here.
Yeah. So, two things about that. Yeah. So the sheriff's office for the whole county has joined this program, and the Northwest Regional. Now, I understand that E-Town has its own police as well, but as soon as the borough stops, Northwest Regional is in charge.
Right.
Here's a couple problems with that. Our county commissioners, two of our county commissioners, have a basic misunderstanding about what the responsibilities are of local and state law enforcement on this. And I've tried to correct it every way I know how. And they think that it is the responsibility of localities to do the work of ICE whenever asked. That would be a violation of our basic federalist system, right? Like, you can't say, hey, local cops, you have to do everything I tell you to do and do your own job, okay? So the sheriff's department is particularly concerning as a county level, because as you also saw in that newspaper article, they can't do the basic functions of sheriffs right now. Court has been canceled 4 times this week because they didn't have enough people to be bailiffs and work the metal detectors, but they have agreed to join on to ICE in this task force model. And I want to be clear what the task force model is. It was dismantled in 2012 because it was costing local law enforcement millions of dollars in lawsuits. Maricopa County in Arizona, $43 million worth of lawsuits, because it's basically an invitation to racially profile people. How would a local police officer have any idea what your immigration status is, other than by looking at you and assuming things based on the color of your skin or what language you use, right? So think about that for a second. And so what local law enforcement was doing was essentially approaching Hispanic people and saying, well, you're speaking Spanish right now. Can I see proof that you're in the country legally? It's not how it works. You don't have to positively prove that you're in the country legally to local law. So the task force model is as scary as it is. It's even scarier that our fundamental, that the sheriff's department doesn't have the capacity to do its main job. Northwest Regional is really interesting to me. We know that, for example, in Lancaster City, the police will only work with ICE when there's a judicial warrant, right? Meaning that there is a specific, and that's true of it. You have to listen to those. That's like a warrant. You have to help enforce those. But other departments decide based on whatever they feel like, right? Manhattan Township participates with ICE quite a lot, and now Northwest is explicitly doing so. And I ask people this all the time. 40 hours of training that every officer has to undergo to do that. First of all, 40 hours is not adequate for knowing people's constitutional rights and all that stuff, but it is 40 hours of overtime they have to pay those officers to go do this training. I'm very concerned about it, and you know who else is? And this is something that really, I wake up every morning just conflicted about this. The dairy farmers. The dairy farmers are not happy about this, and they walk this interesting line of being the main employers of undocumented immigrants in our community, while supporting policies that are trying to get rid of undocumented people from our country. I'll tell you a story just because I think it's funny.
We're gonna have to wrap.
We do? Is it
So,
time?
yeah, you can
Okay,
finish the story,
cool.
but
Oh, it's 10:19, my goodness. Okay, I'll finish the story real quick. Day after the election, dairy farmer calls me and says, I'd like to have a pro bono legal clinic put on by CWS on my farm. So we don't go places to do that. We provide pro bono help if a client comes to us, but we don't do, clinics for free. So he says, okay, well, how much would it cost? And I said, well, let's see how much you donated to anti-immigrant. How much did you donate to anti-immigrant candidates? $6,500? Okay. Oh, that's supposed to be private. How did you know that? No. All of that stuff is public. And I said, so it'd be about $6,500, and he said, well, that's extortion. And I said, I don't understand this fundamental principle of you. I think the answer is you feel safe from your farm being raided because you've given so much money to folks that will essentially protect you. And this Northwest Regional Cooperation Agreement is very much rivaling that exact population because, again, it doesn't mean that they actually have a reason to be on the farm. It means that if they see a bunch of guys driving home from the farm at night, that they can pull them over and ask them about their immigration status, which is not what we should be expecting. So, thank you. I didn't realize it was 10:19.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
we'll follow up. There's more to do.